Brothers and sisters, welcome back to the Behavior Revolution Scriptures. This little project that Yahusha's put in our hearts to do, to make everything simple for those in the 21st century so they can get deliverance, they can meet Yahusha for themselves and then go on their path. Nothing to do with us. We're just getting the word out there in a very simple English colloquial slang, modern 21st century way. The last few episodes we've been dealing with the introduction, then we dealt with the week of creation. Last episode we dealt with the dragon, and I just wanted you to see the reality. That music's too loud. I wanted you to see the reality of unclean spirits in your life and the constant battle to get rid of them all the time. They don't stop ever. They're never going to stop until Yahusha comes back. So don't wonder why they don't stop. They're never stopping. They are unrepentant. They will not stop. But you just say Yahusha. No, get lost. Yahusha says that. Yahusha. And they go. They hate the name of Yahusha. So we're going to go further down into this story of deceit and murder and betrayal and sinfulness after the fall of mankind, after Adam and Eve disobeyed Yahusha in the garden by partaking in unclean, improper use of sexual divine power from the dragon. They believed his lies. They got involved in some pretty shady behavior, which greatly offended Yahusha. They offended him. And so he kicked them out. He can't be around that kind of behavior. So now we come to their first children, Cain and Abel. Now I in the last video I mentioned that Cain may have been conceived by the dragon, the seed of the dragon. I've left it there, all right? It's for you to make up your mind about. I haven't brought it up again because the jury's still out for me and the scriptures themselves don't talk. They do say later on, one of the, I forget who says it, in one of the epistles, that Cain, who was from that wicked one, but that could just mean he was, listening to the dragon, so it could mean anything. But I've just left it there in the last chapter because I want you to think about it. I want you to think about what the enemy's really like and what you've been delivered from legally and what your battle is to overcome. Overcome the world. Not the world out there, the world that's in you, the world that's still in you, the Egypt that's still in you, that you still carry around and you still think fondly of, and you still have to yourself, little secret trinkets that you've hidden under your tent that no one else is allowed to know about. Even your wife or children, anyone knows that that's mine. I've protected this, I've guarded this. This is my little secret little sinfulness. All that's got to go. And most of that stuff's behavior. Yahusha wants a spotless bride. So our behavior has to change, brothers and sisters. We have to become clean. We have to put off the world inside us, overcome the pesterings and keep moving forward. Yeah, we never stop hearing them, but we don't let them slow us down anymore. And if you stumble, if you do something wrong, if you sin, you get back up and you keep going. Because that's their greatest pleasure, making you stumble and then trying to keep you there. Even though they're the one who's planted the seed to try and destroy us. Because one sin leads to another sin, leads to another sin. You go into a downward spiral, and not long after you want to kill yourself. And that's the plan of the enemy, to tear down everything good that Yahusha has created. And the best thing, the ultimate masterpiece of his creation was men and women, mankind. So that's why he's after us, brothers and sisters. Particularly if you've been immersed and you are now in a different commonwealth and you are not owned by him. If you have the sign of the covenant, you're obeying the Shabbat, the seventh day Shabbat, resting. You've got Yahusha's name written on your forehead. The dragon's after you. The dragon is after the remnant. The dragon's after the remnant, remember? That's why he whisks her out into the wilderness to hide her. So we're in the wilderness, brothers and sisters. We're hidden all over the world. That's why we're not really a movement. But we are, but we're not, but we are, but we're not. Behavior revolution is a movement, but we don't know who's in it. the bride, the Nazarene, we don't know who they are. Those who are standing up and, that's silly, because you're just putting yourself in the firing line of the dragon, who hates you and will attack you unnecessarily. You don't need to be attacked, and there's enough attack in the day just from the people we deal with and our jobs and our work and our families. There's enough spiritual activity, isn't there? Enough pestering and torment in the day. Why stand up on a global stage and, focus all the missiles at you? It's ridiculous. Anyway, settle down. Cain and Abel, let's go for it. Adam and 𝗂𝗏 had many children after they left the garden. They would have had to. How did Cain go and marry someone if he was the first child? Adam and 𝗂𝗏 had many children after they left the garden, and the earth began to populate. Their first son was Cain, and he became a farmer of the earth. Their next son, Abel, however, became a shepherd of the sheep. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing better about it or worse about a farmer or a shepherd. They're both equal occupations. Some people like to say, Cain was only a farmer. That's why Yahusha didn't like. No, it had nothing to do with his occupation. It was to do with his behavior. And as they both matured, both men and all of Adam's children were taught about upright, clean and unblemished behavior by their father, and how they were to now approach their Creator through regular animal blood offerings at Yahusha's appointed times, in order to repent of their evil deeds and walk in obedience. Anytime I see appointed times or animal sacrifice or offerings, I highlight it, because I want you to understand that Yahusha didn't just bring the 10 Commandments in at Mount Sinai with Moshe. He brought all that in as an official law, as a civil, this is how we're going to live, regulation, punishable regulation. He brought it in as a lifestyle then officially, but the actual instructions themselves he was bringing up to remind them of what they were taught from the very beginning. Do you think that suddenly he changed? And suddenly when Moshe came along, it was time to tell people who I am? No. This is all the same stuff he told Adam and 𝗂𝗏. Why do you think he kicked them out? He'd gone through all this with them. He had all that time with them. The closest knit relationship he could possibly have was in the garden. They knew him inside and out. The things they would have known about him, the mind boggles. We can't even get that close now. We have him inside us, but they were fully possessed by him in this amazing state. And that's why it hurt him so much, offended him so much when they chose that wicked, dirty, downright stinking bloody bastard of a demon devil. That's why they chose to believe him, and they were booted out. So they were taught animal blood offerings. They were taught about the altar from the very beginning. Yahusha's appointed times. The moment Adam and 𝗂𝗏 were out of the garden, they were taught how to approach Yahusha. It's not a new thing. On this particular day though, Cain offered a slap-happy, this is why Yahusha wasn't happy. Cain offered a slap-happy substandard offering of fruit from the ground to Yahusha. No blood involved. Remember, everything had to be covered with blood. If you're going to approach Yahusha for any kind of communication or relationship, you had to acknowledge how fallen, how depraved, how sinful, how wrong you were. And the only way to repent and be like that was to cover with blood. Not cover yourself, but slaughter an animal. That's the only way Yahusha would accept any kind of communication. It's just how it had to be. So he offered fruit from the ground, slap-happy, substandard, no blood involved. And Abel actually sacrificed the very best firstborn sheep of his flock to Yahusha as instructed. Seeing the motivations of their heart, Yahusha was pleased with Abel's offering, with his effort, and sent a mighty burst of fire from the sky, which burnt up his offering. And Abel felt wonderful that Yahusha had shown him favour that day and had rewarded him for his efforts in approaching him. He then looked on in anticipation to see if his brother's offering would get the same light show treatment. He was excited. He wanted to see it happen again. But alas, there was silence. There was silence and no acceptance from Yahusha for Cain's substandard offering It had no blood, therefore no acknowledgement of repentance towards his creator. Where am I getting all these little bits of story from that you haven't heard before? I've written down the bottom of the page here. We've got, see how down the bottom there? It says Bereshith 4 plus Yahusha. All this is written in the book of Yahusha. Book of Yahusha is fascinating if you want to read it, brothers and sisters. It's not a book about deliverance. It's not a necessarily inspired book, but it's inspired enough to tell the account of what happened around the same time. And Musha refers to it, and other people in the Old Testament refer to it all the time. So if they can refer to it and they acknowledge the book as being truthful, why can't we? I haven't added every single thing that Yahusha shares into this text. I've only gone by the characters that we're dealing with at the time. We're dealing with Cain and Abel here, so I've added bits to the story just so we get more fullness of understanding without changing the actual event or moral of the story, I guess you could say. The whole book of Scripture is about love and deliverance, and we haven't changed that. So Cain took Yahusha's silence very personally, got very jealous of his brother's favour, and he went into a misery sulk. So Yahusha said, Cain, why are you throwing a moody little princess tantrum? I always accept you if you put the right effort in, don't I? But if you're lazy and disobedient, then the enemy is waiting at the doorway, ready to control you. And he wants to get you big time. But if you do well and behave as instructed, you can easily conquer him. Snap out of it, son. Come on, chill out. Take the lesson. Do better next time. No way. But Cain wouldn't receive this, and even though he told all this to his brother, his stubborn attitude remained, and he even began entertaining the idea of killing his brother. And who was there sneaking around, skulking around in the background, putting those thoughts in his head? Sometime after this, both Cain and Abel were out working in the fields. Cain planting seed and Abel feeding his flocks. One of Abel's sheep wandered into an area Cain had just planted seeds in and trampled them, which made Cain furious. He went up to his brother with hatred in his veins, saying, Oi! Why the hell would you feed your flaming sheep here? Get your flock out of here and stay off my land. Oh, you mean these sheep here that you eat and clothe yourself with, brother? That's intelligent, isn't it? You give me back your clothes and also last night's dinner, and I'll get off your land. Deal? You're such an annoying pain. How about I just kill you right here instead? Who would know? Who would miss you? Your blood would never be required of me. Our Creator Yahuwah would know. He sees everything we do and judges all our wickedness accordingly. If you spill my blood today, it will be all you'll be able to think about for the rest of your life, brother, which may not be long, because Yahuwah will avenge me, and my blood will be on your head. And when Cain heard these words from his goody-goody two-shoes brother, his heart burned within him and his seething hatred rose up. He took the sharp end of his ploughing tool and thrust it violently into his brother Abel's chest, murdering him. Abel's body fell to the ground and Cain freaked out, seeing his brother's blood gushing out everywhere into the earth next to his flocks. Imagine that. There'd never been any, the idea of seeing bloodshed, they'd had to sacrifice animals, but to see your own brother's blood just gushing out onto the ground, his lifeless body laying on the ground next to his herds, and blood going all over the ground. That's why I put that picture up there, the blood all over the ground. Oh, it's gone. Where was it? Page before. All that blood all over the ground. Imagine that. It was a bloodbath. Blood everywhere. He freaked out. Blood gushing out everywhere into the earth next to his flocks. Cain cried out over his brother's dead body, weeping bitterly in sorrow for what he had done. Then he dug a hole in the ground, placed his brother in it and buried him. So covered his tracks, he thought. A little later, Yahusha said, "Hey Cain, where's your brother, mate?" And Cain snapped back, "How the hell should I know? Do I follow him around?" But Yahusha said, "I can hear the voice." This is interesting. "I can hear the voice of your brother's innocent blood screaming from the dirt. Not only did you lie to me, but you slaughtered your brother in cold blood. You're banished from your home and you will be a wanderer and a criminal for the rest of your life. This is your punishment forever." He could hear the blood. What about that? And Cain cried out, saying, "No, this punishment is too much for me. I can't stand to be hidden from your face. I'm so sorry, Father. If I leave here and wander the earth, I'll surely be killed by whoever finds me." But Yahusha said, "No, that won't happen. I'll put a mark of protection on you. And if anyone kills you, then their punishment will be 7 times greater." 7 times greater than yours. And Cain left the presence of Yahusha and his homeland and lived in a land further east of Eden. He found a wife, had a son, built a city, named it after his son Enoch. This is interesting. I went back to it. The life-creating light and vibration of Yahusha's word is present in the blood of mankind, and he can hear it. Remember in our when we were talking about the creation week and the voice of Yahusha, the vibration, the frequency of Yahusha's voice, the life and the light within it can actually create things, create something out of nothing. That's the same power we're talking about here. That life vibration power is in mankind's blood, and Yahusha can hear it. That's why blood is so important to him. It's a life force in itself. Without blood, our bodies wouldn't function. And within the blood, not just on a metaphysical level, but within our blood, Yahusha can hear the energy, the power, the light, the life that's in our blood. And that's why it's so important to him that he says later on, no blood is to be shed. The blood of mankind is more precious than anything else on the earth because it's created in my image, he says. So if it's blood for blood, eye for eye, you can't shed blood. That's why murder here is such a big deal. 21st century is not a big deal. You can't even switch on the telly at night without hearing about a murder. Hopefully it's not in your own street. So, but brothers and sisters, this life-creating light and vibration of Yahusha's word is present in the blood of mankind, and he can hear it. So how much blood can he hear crying from the dirt that's been murdered? And Adam and Ḥawwa had another child and called him Sheth, and they were overjoyed that Yahusha had given them another son after the horrific death of Abel. Years later, Sheth had a son and called him Enosh. And the name of Yahuwah the Father continued to be acknowledged, not began to be acknowledged. I don't believe that for a second. Do you think Adam and Ḥawwa didn't know the name of Yahusha in the garden? Yeah? It may not have been Yahusha, it was probably Yahuwah, because that was the name that was revealed at that point in time. Yahuwah. Do you think that, Adam and Ḥawwa's children didn't know the name of Yahuwah? So that's why I've written, the name of Yahuwah the Father continued to be acknowledged. Another thing I've done in all these genealogy chapters is in many places I've just booted them out and I've put a family tree chart there instead. Much more user-friendly. If it's just such and such begat, 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 I've just put it in a form so you can see that picture there. So you can either click on the links and look at this yourself. You can go through it. I found myself, particularly when I was reading Yasha and the scriptures later on, I was constantly referring to this family tree here because thinking, where did they come into it? Oh yeah, they were such and such as grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, all the way down to Noach, you can see down there, and to Noach. It also tells you the ages of Adam's line anyway, how old they were. 930 years. They never made it to 1,000 though, did they? They never made it to a day old. Remember, 1,000 years is one day to Yahusha, And he said, on the day that you disobey me, you shall die. And they did. Who was the oldest person? Methuselah. Methuselah lived to 969 years old. Imagine that. We don't even fathom that. The time in our just under 100 years that we're on this earth. That's like, you know, everything's like times 8, you know. You'd be a 75-year-old would be called a baby. Oh, you're just a baby, mate. I'm 969 years old. You know, like, it's amazing just the time. You know, Australia is only just over 200 years old. Our whole country was just indigenous prior to that. 200 years ago. Yeah, 200 and a bit. So this genealogy, I've written this over here, this genealogy shows us how trustworthy and true the words of Yahusha are, because even though he allowed mankind to flourish and prosper through the generations, despite their lawlessness and evil behaviour, no one lived longer than 1,000 years. No one lived longer than one day in Yahusha's years. Everyone literally dies on the day they disobey him. Because this whole earth is only going to be 6 days old before he flicks the switch and returns, burns it up, restores, new heaven, new earth, new Jerusalem come down. That's the end of the 6th day for him. 6,000 years for us, but 6 days for him. And then on the 7th day, what happens? We rest. And you can't possibly rest if there's unclean spirits and a devil, demon, 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 pestering, can you? So they've all been chained up, waiting for the great white throne judgment. All right? I'm getting tongue-tied. So this genealogy here takes you down. Can I go smaller? No, I can't. We're going to talk about Cain-Abel-Enoch in a minute, so I don't need to read that. And that takes us, this genealogy here takes us, this family tree takes us right down to the worldwide flood, right there. You can see the ages deteriorating though, can't you? We started up here at 930 years old, 912, 905, 910, 895, a bit younger this one. 962, jumped up again. Cain-Abel, 365, but then he was taken. He just got taken into the other dimension. Wow. 969, 777, 950 years old. Then Shem is only 600. So you can see the age, the time, the life getting younger and younger, dying younger. And there's a reason for that too after the flood. The whole water canopy, the protective covering gets, that's how the earth floods, because this thing falls in. Anyway, let's go on, because we've got a few extra characters here that are written in the book of Yahusha. I wanted to add this because we see from the very beginning, it didn't just happen at the time of Noah. It's been happening, I mean, it's nearly, how long was it? I've forgotten. It says here somewhere. It says down here how long it was. It's nearly 2 millennia, not quite 2,000 years. Anyway, I've forgotten the exact date, but it's almost nearly 2,000 years between Adam and Noah. A little bit less, I think. But 2,000 years. 2,000 years. What's been happening in that time? We don't get much. There's not much story we get. That's why I've added bits like this, so we know what really happened. We know that we've always said, oh, all the religions come from Babel. Yeah, well, they came a lot earlier than that. Trust me. Look, idolatry and birth control. Birth control. The earth, this is all written in the book of Yahusha, guys. You can read it. The earth soon became a barren wasteland with no crops due to the ground being cursed with thorns and thistles, the punishment for Adam's disobedience. Sheth's son Anush, oh dear, Sheth's son Anush spent his life teaching. So this is Adam's grandson. Adam's son was Sheth, and Sheth's son Anush spent his life teaching and upholding the instructions that had been passed down to him from his grandfather Adam. But the rest of humanity was becoming more and more depraved by the second. They made objects of brass, iron, wood, stone, and they bowed down and worshipped them. As stupid as it is. Each person had their own personal deity. And after the men saw that their wives were growing older and that having children was taking a huge toll on their bodies, they, under the influence of Shaitan's spirits, concocted a serum that would stop their women from falling pregnant, because they wanted their wives to stay young, slender and attractive. This procedure disobeyed Yahusha's direct instruction to be fruitful and keep on populating the earth. Just up here, the wives who were still able to have children were looked upon as hideous, ugly creatures by their husbands, who were sleeping with the hot, sexy women who had taken the wicked serum to stop falling pregnant. You can imagine that, can't you? That's how superficial society is today, isn't it? Look at all the reality TV shows, the Kardashians, and imagine you got all these young, sexy, hot women, and all these fat women who are putting on weight and having babies, and this and that and this and that, which was what Yahusha designed them to do. They were doing the right thing. This disobedience rose up in the nostrils of Yahusha, and he despised their idolatry and perversion. Despised it. So he caused the Gihon River to rise up and wipe them all out. There was a little bit of a mini tsunami, a flood that happened. Wiped them all out. But this, of course, because remember, it's 2,000 years of time, this didn't stop the wickedness from spreading. As the generations continued, something much more brutal was needed, obviously, on a global scale. Then we have this interesting story of Cain. I've added this because we've talked about Cain and how he was sent away, banished from his family. 5 generations passed down the wicked line of Cain. And Lamech, Cain's great-great-great-grandson, was also was old and almost blind. So who's this? Let's go back to our timeline. 5 generations have passed down the wicked line of Cain and Lamech. So we're talking about Lamech and his son. So let's go back up here. So we've got Adam, who had Cain and Abel. So we talked about Sheth, and that was Enosh we're talking about. Enosh was the one that was being obedient to the instructions and telling everybody. So now we've got 5 generations ahead. So we've gone right down this line here to Lamech. Lamech, right down the line of Cain. Lamech. Lamech had a son over here named Tubal-Cain. Tubal-Cain. Sounds like a Viking, doesn't he? Tubal-Cain. So remember that. Take a mental picture of this in your mind as we read on. We've got Lamech and Tubal-Cain. And over here. So 5 generations passed down the wicked line of Cain and Lamech. Cain's great-great-great-grandson was old and almost blind. He and his son Tubal-Cain were out in the fields one day, and his son was leading him because he's almost blind. Cain, Adam's son. So Adam, who's also still alive, and his son Cain, who's alive too. Cain approached them from a distance, and the men thought it was wild game, an animal. Didn't recognize him from so far away. So Tubal-Cain helped his father load an arrow onto his bow, and Lamech fired it straight into Cain, killing him, which is ironic, isn't it? And Yahusha, it says here, and Yahusha saw that justice had finally been served to Cain for murdering his own brother Abel many years before. Justice had been served. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. You killed your brother, you're dead. No, it happened many hundreds of years later though, doesn't it? It just shows how, time is to Yahusha, is not to us. Particularly in this 21st century where if our internet goes down for 5 minutes, we're just scrambling. If we can't get a web page to load in lightning speed, this thing, Yahusha's time's much different. Hundreds of years later, justice was served, and Cain was murdered by the arrow for killing his own brother. When Lamech and his son Tubal-Cain, what's happened? When Lamech and his son Tubal-Cain went to see what they had shot with the arrow and saw that it was Cain, their great, however many great-grandfathers, Lamech cried out and wept, screaming at his son, "This is no animal, you stupid fool! Why didn't you tell me it was a man?" And in shock horror, he slammed both his hands together around Tubal-Cain's head. slammed his son's head and killed him. Slammed both his hands together around Tubal-Cain's head, killing him instantly. Then we jump forward. After hearing about this, both of Lamech's wives hated him and separated themselves from his home and wanted to kill him. Not only had he killed the great-great-great-great-grandfather, he'd killed his son. However, after some time passed, Lamech approached both of them saying, "Please, my wives, hear me out. You've accused me of murdering our grandfather Cain and our son Tubal-Cain in cold blood without cause. But I'm an old white-haired man and I can hardly see. I'm so very sorry for what happened, but it truly was an accident. I never meant to kill them. If our grandfather Cain is avenged sevenfold, then let 77-fold come onto me for my evil." In other words, he's just feeling like crap, for what he's done. If Cain was avenged, then let me be avenged 77 times that for my evil. And after seeking counsel from Adam, who was still alive, the women returned to their husband Lamech, but had no more children with him, for they knew from Kenan. Remember, Kenan was who's Kenan? Come on, who's Kenan? Kenan had been writing things down on stone. That was interesting. Kenan. Which one's Kenan? So we've got Adam's son Sheth, who replaced Hebel. And then Sheth had a son Anush, who was obedient and started teaching everybody the instructions. And then, so we're talking about Anush's son Kenan. Kenan was getting visions and writing things down on stone tablets about a flood, a destruction, about the judgment of the Creator that was coming because of mankind's lawlessness and wickedness. So he'd started telling people about this, and it was kind of rumour, So Kenan, that's who we're talking about there, Kenan. Look at how long these people lived for. I said that before, but so it's obvious that Adam's still alive. It's quite possible that Adam, you can do the math. I did a bit of it months ago, but you can do the math. A lot of these people, a couple of them might have actually died in the flood. If they lived this long, Noach's here, and Methuselah, it's quite possible that maybe even Lamech, I forget now. I'm a bit rusty. I'm in Egyptian slavery right now. I'm a bit rusty on this now. But you know what I'm saying, though. It's quite possible that a couple of these people died in the flood. They weren't chosen. Anyway, let's get back on track. After seeking counsel from Adam, who was still alive, the women, this is Lamech's wives, returned to their husband Lamech, but had no more children with him, for they knew from Kenan, who'd been writing stuff down, that Yahusha's anger was brooding against mankind because of its relentless wickedness. And Adam's great-grandson Kenan, who'd been given wisdom from Yahusha about a great many things, had written on tablets of stone about a great horrific judgment that was coming soon to destroy all mankind, a worldwide flood. So that's why these two wives weren't really interested in having any more kids, if they were going to be destroyed anyway. Anyway, it's all very interesting. And this isn't in the canon of scripture. It's not specifically dealing with deliverance, but it's interesting. So let's talk about it. Then we have Enoch, Canok. Kenan's great-grandson was Canok, who walked with Yahusha, and whose very being was wrapped up in his instructions. And he despised the evil ways of mankind. When Enoch, Canok, was 65 years old, he had a son who he named Methuselah. And after that, he hid himself away in secret for many, many years from the eyes of mankind and their increasing wickedness. So Canok had enough with mankind and their wickedness, just as a lot of us feel about, and we have to go out there to work and make a living these days. But inside ourselves, you look around and we're not really interested, are we? It's just hideous out there. You only have to look sideways at somebody and they rip you to shreds. One day Yahusha told Canok to leave his secret place where he was hiding from society and go back to the nations and teach them the way in which they should live. And he did so. And word began to spread throughout all the land. Anyone who wants to know the ways of the Creator Yahuwah and behave in a way that pleases him, go and see Enoch. And all the people began gathering before him to hear what he had to say. For the spirit of Yahusha was upon him. And all the kings of mankind, together with their princes and judges, came to Enoch. And when they heard his wisdom, they bowed down to him and insisted that he reign over them. So he did. He did. 130 kings and princes made Enoch their ruler, putting their kingdoms under his power and command. Must have been pretty impressive wisdom, eh? And Enoch taught them wisdom, knowledge, and the ways of Yahusha for 243 years, and he brought peace among them and throughout all the earth for the duration of his life. It was impressive wisdom. That's why to us, when we read all this stuff which has been labelled erroneously the Old Testament, you've got to remember that even the disciples, the emissaries of Yahusha, they only had the Old Testament. They only had the old ancient scriptures. That's all they had. That's all they knew. And the wisdom and guidance and instruction was amazing, as we're discovering now. We're only a few chapters in. But they didn't have all this written down back then. It was passed on from word to word, like Chinese whispers almost, So that's why when you look at the age of their lives, if one person chose not to tell their family for 700, 800, 900 years, you've got how many generations of society on the earth that don't know about Yahuwah, don't know his instructions. That's why it was important, so important to pass on. And that's why when we get to Exodus and they're leaving Egypt, he keeps saying, tell your children, don't forget to tell your children, tell your children, don't forget to tell your children. Because even though the lifespan was a lot less back then, in the beginning, 600, 800, 900 years, you don't tell your children, they don't tell their children. That's why the earth had to be destroyed by a flood, because they stopped passing on this truth. Nobody was writing. Clearly, what was his name? Kenan was writing stuff down on stones, but it's pretty hard to pass on stones to people, isn't it? A bit heavy. So, very important that when we are having a family, that we tell them the truth. Have our homes in order. So, and Enoch taught them the ways of Yahusha for 243 years, and he brought peace among them. All these nations, the Goyim, the nations, the pagan people, were living in peace because they were obeying Enoch, Enoch's instructions for the duration of his life. And when Lamech was 56 years old, Adam, the first man on earth, died. So Adam was still alive for this. So when Lamech was 56 years old, Adam, the first man on earth, died at the age of 930, and his family buried him in a cave, which Yahusha had told him. And it was a lavish affair and a ceremony fit for a king, with great weeping and mourning, as is the custom today. That's interesting, considering we're told not to talk to, not to honour or worship the dead. They had this great big ceremony, apparently. Adam died, he and all his children after him, because he ate of the tree of the understanding of good and evil in disobedience to Yahusha. And the text thought it important to add that there, to remind us why there was so much death. Immortality had been taken after they left the garden. They no longer lived forever. And it was in the year of Adam's death that Enoch decided to leave the company of mankind once more and live in secret to serve Yahusha. But he only hid himself for 6 days at a time. And then he appeared to his people for 1 day each week. And a great wave of fear spread across the nation about Enoch. For the people, princes and kings, desperately wanted to know what Yahusha had spoken to him about, but they couldn't look at him, because after being in the presence of the Creator, the power and esteem of Yahusha was literally shining from him. And the people thought if they approached him, they might die. It's interesting when you read this. Some of the times when I read the book of Yahusha, I found myself thinking, oh, they just copy that from Moses. Look, that's what they said about Moses when he came down the mountain, And when they were getting the women to stop having children, they just copied that from the story of Noah with the Nephilim. They just copied, this is copied. But then it's easy to dismiss things, because if I had dismissed it, my job would have been easier. I wouldn't have had to go through all these extra books and piece things together. So part of me wanted it all to be wrong and Gnostic, and a lot of them are Gnostic, but part of me didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be wrong. But then Yahusha kept sort of putting it on me, and I was thinking about it, and I thought, no, it makes sense. You know, like when the fire came down on Cain and Abel. Abel's offering, the fire came down and lit the sacrifice up. Oh, they just copied that off Elijah. You know, no. The text said it, so we'll go with it. Yahusha dealt with fire a lot, you know, and we'll deal with that later on. There's lots of places where you could think, oh, they just copy that. No. Yahusha does similar things to similar people, which makes sense. So, I lost my spot. Yeah, the power of Yahusha was literally shining from Enoch, and the people thought if they approached him, they might die. And while Enoch was teaching them the ways of clean behaviour, Yahusha told Enoch that he intended to take him from the earth into his dimension and allow him to assist in the governing of his kingdom, just as he had done on earth. What about that? He was so impressed and pleased with Enoch? Yeah. He was so impressed and pleased with Enoch's behaviour that, because it said in the beginning, his very being was caught up in the instructions of Yahusha. He was sold over. What was it? How was it explained? His very being, see here? His very being was wrapped up in his instructions. That's what it says about Enoch. That's why Yahusha was so impressed by him. So, knowing that he was going to leave the earth soon, Enoch assembled all the people one last time, saying, I've been called to ascend into Yahusha's dimension. And I don't know when, I'm leaving. So I'll teach you wisdom and knowledge and give you all Yahusha's instruction on how to behave on this earth, so you can live peacefully. And he taught them, rebuked them, gave them laws and statutes, and while Enoch was still speaking to them, they lifted up their eyes, and the likeness of a great horse descended from the sky and began pacing in the air. Oh, they just copied this off Elijah when he got taken up in the... Was it Elijah or Elisha? I forget now. I haven't got that far yet. Anyway, the likeness of a great horse descended from the sky and began pacing in the air. So Enoch charged them one last time to be obedient to Yahusha's divine instructions and to continue living in cleanliness and peace. Then Enoch climbed up onto the horse and began riding away. And 800,000 people who saw this began following him, and many journeyed with him 6 days. And I kind of summarized this to get to the point, but they were traveling with him for 6 days, and he kept saying to them, go home, you can't go where I'm going. Oh, they just copied that off Yahusha. He said that to his disciples. No. Go home, you can't go where I'm going, stop following me. And day after day, there would be more people that fell away and went home. But there was still a few left on the 7th day, and it was on the 7th day that Enoch ascended into the sky in a giant whirlwind with horses and chariots of fire. And on the 8th day, all the kings went to the place where he had disappeared, and they could not find Enoch, for Yahusha had taken him. And there was just this big pile of snow where he'd been taken. Big pile of snow. How could there be snow if there was no such thing as rain? Well, we're not talking about rain, are we? We're talking about snow. These are just all the stupid arguments people go on about. So Yahusha had taken him. Okay, the Nephilim are next. We're not going to do Nephilim today. That's enough for today, guys. Stay tuned for our next episode, and we're going to talk about Nephilim and Noah's Ark and the great global worldwide flood. I hope you're enjoying this, brothers and sisters. I hope you can see that, once again, we have to overcome the wickedness in this world. We have to stay on our path of deliverance, and it's a personalized path. The scriptures are alive to everybody. The instructions are the same to everybody. We need to come, Yahusha's bride needs to come into one mind. But our own training plan and how he does it, how he goes about it, is very personalized, all right? So stay strong, brothers and sisters. I love you, and we're going to keep going next episode. Bye-bye.